In the words of Linkin Park, I had to fall to lose it all, but in the end it doesn't really matter. But, in the words of ABC, I've seen the future, I can't afford it. Ex-millionaires, what made you lose all your money? Story 1. My dad lost everything but his tools and clothes in the divorce. Over the next 30 years, built up enough wealth to own 2 local properties and a family cabin with 100 acres of land, $500K of investments, and a pension worth about $600K. Between the pension and his Social Security, his wife, at the time of his unaliving, would make about $70K a year without touching anything. She sold one of the properties, and I had no freaking clue what happened to the cabin that has been in my family for 70 years. I got nothing. My kids got nothing. But when she expires, all her kids will get to split the money. I don't fault her. She's a very sweet person, and my dad never wanted to face the reality of not living, so never made the appropriate arrangements despite saying he would for years. He never got around to it, so it all by default went to his spouse. My dad also kept each side of his family separate, so we were never really in contact with each other. It's kind of frustrating to be on the sidelines of this whole thing. And it's easy to blame the wife, but it sounds like this guy kept things separate from his son. It was hers to make the decision. It's a bit cruel that the dad never made any plans for his own son, but left everything to the wife. Do you think maybe he thought the wife would make some allowances and give something to the son? Story 2. My dad is an ex-millionaire. He is a total wizard at starting successful businesses. His problem is he can't let them go. He's the boss/owner who never hires a manager that's not family because he just doesn't trust anyone else to run it. He drove $3 million companies into the ground because he couldn't keep up with his own success and refused to hire people to do it for him. See, it's not just all tragic stories of bad decisions. Or at least, bad and harmful decisions. Right, that's not right either. This guy's hard-working, but he doesn't take the next step. It's like he's at this point where he's comfortable with failing. Maybe if he got to the point where he could sell it when it's at this point, he could probably make some money that way. Sounds like he needs some internal reflection to be able to figure out what to do. Story 3. Hypothetical millionaire. I bought $100 worth of Bitcoin when they were about $1 each. I sold them when they were about $2.50 each, and was so happy I made money from internet coins. As of the moment I am typing this, those coins would be worth $1,855,000. We don't know the future. The stock market is very volatile, especially with cryptocurrency. There's plenty of safe investments you can make. Whatever you invest in is just what you're comfortable risking. Bigger risk makes bigger rewards, but if you're not comfortable in that space, you're not going to make the right decisions. Story 4. A common template for wealth loss is underestimating the role of luck in the initial wealth accumulation, and as a result, taking irresponsible risks on new ventures and/or maintaining lifestyles that overestimate future earning potential. I've seen this with some folks who made money in finance in the 80s and 90s. While extremely smart and hardworking, their path to tens or hundreds of millions of dollars were also pretty lucky. Edit. At 330 upvotes and a bunch of replies, this comment is kind of a metaphor for what I'm referring to. When the topic of wealth comes up online, the subsequent discussion about the role of luck almost always happens. In this case, I just happened to be the guy to make the obvious comment about luck on a thread that happened to get some attention. Appreciating that it took some basic effort to write it out and hit submit, my upvotes and replies have nothing to do with me personally. Story 5. I watched a guy at a casino somehow get a loan against his house, about $200K, and lose it. He looked self-unaliving. Apparently, he was already in almost $50K and thought he could win it back. I got hired there, and I would leave on Friday and return Monday and see the same people in the same clothes who peed and pooped themselves and were still sitting at the blackjack table gambling. Story 6. Gambling responsibly is near impossible for some people, and it's rough to see. Gotta set your limits and stick to them. If you have $400 you can afford to spend, then take out $400 and don't even look at your card again. Also, just personal preference, but I won't drink a drop when I'm at a casino. Gambling addiction is seriously one of the worst. I go to the casino a couple of times a year when I feel like checking out new slots and drinking some fantastic cocktails. Last time I was there, walking through the parking lot, some guy is having a total full-on argument/shamefest with himself, kicking his truck that was already dented to hell, throwing stuff around the bed, close to a meltdown. I caught a few snippets of what he said, but it was apparent just how deep in the hole he was when I heard, $30,000 freaking dollars, you freaking idiot! Suddenly, my $500 loss over 7 hours didn't feel too bad. I lived in Vegas for a while. For some reason, the gambling bug didn't bite me, and I worked at a lot of casino gigs. For me, I think it was the fact that I played video games before I got to Vegas. At least when I plopped in a quarter into an arcade machine, I got to play a game. Dropping a coin and hitting a button on a slot machine just didn't appeal to me. When I first saw those blackjack machines that are embedded in every bar top all around town, my first thought was, wow, these graphics suck. Story 7. You know how to end up with $1 million after a year of day trading? Start with $2 million. Story 8. My alarm clock that woke me up. If this isn't a pop culture reference, you're definitely talking about the Ferrari with a broken exhaust silencer that your son with OCD drives to his tradesman job. Story 9. Divorce. I was a millionaire, got divorced, which nearly sent me into insolvency, buckled down, and worked my butt off, and am re-millionaired. Guys, don't underestimate the pernicious impact on net worth a bad divorce can have. No prenuptial agreement in place? I own 9 rental properties, all single family. We have it in writing that she gets 1 out of every 3 of them, in the event I purchased a new one and did not update the agreement as to which specific ones. None of my cars, except her daily driver. Seem fair to us. With finances the way they are these days, how do you feel about prenuptial agreements in marriages? Do you think it's a wise decision, or do you think it's callous? Do you think it's an act of greed, or do you think it's acting responsibly, with each person talking about their own financial requirements and needs? Story 10. Crypto Millionaire. Still worth a lot, with my accounts about $850,000 today. I have a lot of XRP. But in 2017, I was worth about $3.5 million before the crash. Lowest was $300,000. I'm a hodler, so I don't day trade usually. My biggest regret is I bought about 200,000 Ripple in 2013, but I got bored and put them for sale at 1 cent per Ripple. As a pipe dream. They were worth like 0.001 cent at the time. I should have just left it. I could have banked some cash on it if I just left and sold it at the peak. Story 11. Gambling and spouse terminal illness. Story 12. Somewhere here there's a billionaire laughing because they're an ex-millionaire too. I was wondering if someone would tell a story about the other direction. Maybe down the line here we'll get to see about how someone became a billionaire. And how many stories do you think here are positive? And how many do you think are negative? Let's read on. Story 13. I was a multimillionaire for 2 weeks. Then the vacation was over and we exchanged our dongs for euros. Story 14. Not me, but an acquaintance. He got caught not paying taxes and dealing in stolen goods. He spent time in federal prison and lost everything, including his wife. Crime does not always pay. Story 15. We were close. Then the Great Recession hit. Lost 60% in 3 years. Just updated the balance sheet today. We're almost back. Who knows what will happen in the next 24 to 36 months, though. That one's vague, but it's kind of inspiring. It's good that they're almost back. I wonder what kind of stuff they're into that is affected by the recession that much. Was it real estate? Did the housing market affect them? Wish we could follow up on this. Story 16. I guess divorce. Maybe fraud as well. Trust me, if you ever win the lotto, every person you've ever met seems like will show up with their hand out. If you want to test that, post on your social media that you won a lottery and see what happens. Then let everyone know you won $5, and then drop everyone who asked for money. Story 17. I built a business worth around $3 million, had a house worth $1.4 million, investments worth more than $2 million, 4 nice cars. Divorce laid me low. An ex-wife, a lawyer, and a judge stripped me of at least 3/4 of that. Left me with a Miata race car, a bit of money, and 51% of my company. Still had to pay alimony. I gave up. I negotiated my way out of alimony by giving up most of the company, liquidated everything else, bought a boat, and sped off. 26 months later, I sailed back into my life and started over. I've earned enough to live a modest retirement, and that's where I am today. Don't get married, boys. It ain't worth it. I've done it twice. The first time was a disaster. The second time was an annoyance. Just my opinion and expertise. I'm way too drunk and shouldn't have posted. Anyway, there it is. Story 18. I got pretty close by selling my company to a bigger competitor. Reinvested most of it since I had not much use for the money, but then got scammed for about $500,000 on buying some real estate. They smelled a newly rich kid from miles away. I still like to think I was worth $1 million at some brief point in time. Edit. Since people are asking, basically I bought a fantastic holiday destination facility from someone who did not own said fantastic holiday destination facility. And by bought, I mean a substantial down payment to keep other interested parties at bay. Classic. Yep, you gotta do research. Either that or find a financial planner you trust. Even if you're not on your way to being a millionaire, that's probably not a bad idea. Try to find somebody that makes some sense. Story 19. Technically not me, but rather my family. My great-grandfather was born to a long line of vicars who had land, properties, and farms. They were loaded. He was the rebel, only son, and swore that he would break tradition. So he joined the army, and come World War II, he was shipped off to fight for Britain. While overseas, he was captured and spent a few years in a POW camp where he subsequently found Jesus. After the war, he returned, joined the clergy, and his father, having perished, gave every single penny to the Godzilla Church. Land, property, and titles all, and lived off his vicar's salary. Obviously, it was never mine to lose, but the knowledge that I could have been a lord with a horse and an affordable zippy white powder addiction really stings. Story 20. First husband. Was making $1 million a year. He was enjoying life, spending frivolously but bringing in enough that it didn't matter. We divorced, but amicably. No alimony, no child support. He just paid for whatever the kids needed. Then he got leukemia. He fought like hell for 3 years. The last 2 years were very expensive. It was worth it. Money won't make you happy, but the lack of it can destroy you. The kids and I can take comfort in knowing that truly there was nothing else possible. His millions bought his kids 2 more years of dad, and I'm glad for him that he enjoyed his life while he could. Story 21. COVID. Built a business that was given a valuation of a few million back in January, but the industry is now down 80%, and I'm doing all I can to avoid bankruptcy. I wonder what kind of business this is that was affected by COVID. It could be tourist-related. It could be in the medical field. Maybe a restaurant or a delivery business. Something people-facing. What else am I missing here? Story 22. A lot of people who will win the lottery will blow their money on big purchases like a house or a yacht. Then they have no money left to pay the yearly costs of those items, and they lose everything. Invest all your money in safe stocks, get a mortgage on a house, and chill the hell out if you win the lottery. Story 23. I work in finance, and my team and I work with all very affluent clients. I've seen so many millionaires lose it all, not from investing in the markets, but from taxes, lifestyle, and poor business decisions. Once, I had a client who was making $50K a month, but was spending $60K a month and perpetually dipping into his investments. There were months where payments bounced because he was living a lifestyle and always wanted more. My favorite investment advice? Same car, same house, same spouse. Story 24. Not me, but a close friend's parents worked at a well-renowned American company in Houston in the early 2000s. They were really high up in the management chain and enjoyed a lot of the perks that came with their position after sticking through thick and thin, especially during the dot-com bubble. Said friend's parents were also very good in managing their money, living very frugally and investing for their future nest egg. Unfortunately, therein lie the rub. All that investment, 401ks, extra cash, etc., was on a single pot. I believed with all their allocation back in 2000s or so, they have invested close to $5 to $6 million and was due to pull it out so they could finally retire. But a company scandal brought all that to a collapse. The company? Enron. All their money evaporated. Like the Wu-Tang Investment Company says, you need to diversify your investments. Do not keep it all in one pot. That's the whole reason behind a hedge fund. It's in the name. You're literally hedging your bets in case something collapses. Story 25. I donated my wealth to Orbital Drop Bear, and highly recommend any millionaire reading this do the same. Story 26. Oxy and Sea Rock. $1,500 a day habit got me high for a few years. Then the other half was when the dealers infiltrated and took me for tens of thousands at a clip. Oh, and a sibling stealing $400K was a dent as well. It's truly a miracle I'm alive. 9 years removed and finally dug myself out and back on top. Kind of. Story 27. My great-grandparents were farmers and lived in North Dakota. In their prime, their team and them were absolutely great farmers. This, along with some other factors, made them super rich. For example, they owned multiple planes and even had a hangar built to store them. They also had a really nice house. Not a mansion, but a really nice and large one. Well, it turns out they were really great at farming, but not so much at paying taxes. I keep reading stories about how billionaires are able to keep all their money because the IRS is defunded enough to where they can't afford to pursue billionaires and higher-ups. It's more the poor people that are simpler to prosecute. Who are all these big rich people, and how are they getting shown up on IRS's radar? What's the disconnect here? Story 28. My mom's second husband was a millionaire. Our family and his first family treated everything as one big family. When he got cancer, he set a very intricate and fair system. Then he appointed 3 people to oversee any emergency changes to his estate. My mom, his first wife, and her second husband. As soon as he expired, they voted against my mother to throw away his whole plan and just give themselves the money. 50-50. Story 29. COVID. My parents have tons of money in stocks and lost their millionaire status due to the crash that happened. I'm talking tens of thousands in a day at one point. Thankfully, with the pharmaceutical trials being successful, they're starting to make back their money, though it's still not where it was before due to the industry they have stock in being hit hard by the shutdowns. To make matters worse, my father is at half pay since he works hospitality. Story 30. Gave most of it away in the divorce. Took what I thought would be enough to pull a leaving Las Vegas. But Ben Sanderson had a big head start on me on the liver damage, so I outlived the money. Started over from zero 16 years ago. Halfway back. Yeah, that sucks. You know how they say you don't know how far you can go until you hit rock bottom? Well, this guy just pretty much orchestrated his own rock bottom. I'm glad he's fighting his way back. He found the drive from somewhere. That's cool. Story 31. 12 years ago, I was making $95K as a software engineer. I was in an accident, suffered a brain injury, lost everything, and haven't worked as a programmer since then. My injury easily cost me $1 million. Story 32. My family lost tons of money with a failed business and bad investments, and ended up with tons of debt and a bad financial situation. They weren't millionaires or anything, though. Story 33. I was a flight attendant and once had a passenger in FC out of Vegas who looked distraught, handed me a 20, and said, "Please, keep the bourbon coming." In flight, he just drank looking down. I asked how he was doing. He said he was trying to figure out how to tell his wife he had lost their home gambling. That was the moment I decided I would never participate in a town that made its money that way. Again, I am so grateful gambling never hit me that hard when I lived in Vegas. Actually, it never hit me at all. I don't think I could even afford to lose what little I had. I guess I never thought I'd be lucky enough to win anything, so I never really tried. Story 34. I'd like to add something because it's so ridiculous. My uncle and aunt inherited a lot of money. They paid to get a Speedway fire truck restored that went straight to a storage unit. Wasn't even theirs. They took multiple trips to monster truck races, WWE events, and the casino. The funniest thing of all was they needed a new car badly, but decided against it. They blew through all their money in less than a year and are now making car payments. How totally stupid. Story 35. A family member of mine has been a millionaire several times over, but he loses it on ex-wives, fiancés, and girlfriends young enough to be his grandchildren. They appear to require a lot of financial maintenance. Story 36. Not sure if it really counts. Not a million and not really lost, but over the course of several months, I gave away what would now be a bit under 200,000 pounds in Bitcoin while demoing cryptocurrency to various groups. At the time, Bitcoin was worth essentially nothing, and I saw it as something that might be useful rather than a store of wealth. So I'd help people set up a wallet, and we'd do some transferring of coins within the group, and I'd give away some paper wallets with some nominal amount in them. It's mildly painful to think that if I'd just picked up more initially, or lost one of my wallets, I might have a fairly decent sum of cash to play with. As it is, I have a slew of fragments of various different cryptocurrencies, probably worth around 100 pounds in total. I keep remembering about reading a contest where second prize was a certain amount of Bitcoin that was worth today far more than the first prize ever was. Looking back on it with today's eyes, it just looks ridiculous. I wonder what happened to the people that actually won that second prize. Did they hodl? Story 37. My ex's mom, not me. She grew up as a trust fund kid in a tremendously rich Jewish family in New York. When she turned 18, she decided to see the world, so she moved to Israel, then Iraq, then France. She spent 30 years moving from country to country, burning her money away like it was unlimited. But, as it turns out, trust funds are actually finite, and one day, she found herself with just barely enough left to get back to the U.S. and buy a tiny house. Her family had at that point long since disowned her, so she had to get a job. Only, what do you do when you have no prior work experience, no credentials beyond high school, and you're 48 years old? Answer? Housekeeping at the local Best Western, apparently. Until they fire you for rocking the boat too much, she proposed a bunch of changes within her first couple of months there, most of which being rather expensive and offering no real benefit beyond, I think it would look nice. Then you drive a short bus for senior citizens, until you turn the wrong way down a one-way street, panic at the sight of oncoming traffic and steer straight into a fire hydrant, then flee the scene, abandoning the company vehicle and its several now injured passengers. Story 38. My cousin was a big rapper in the 90s. When I say his name, you probably know him or heard of his music. It's still used today in the USA. Anyway, he became a millionaire really fast at 20-something years old after being a dishwasher. His manager made him sign bad contracts, and almost all of the money after a year or two went to his manager and accountant. He's still doing okay, producing some music in Los Angeles, but not a millionaire anymore. Story 39. Athletes, millionaires are rich. Owners, billionaires are wealthy. Big difference. The average pro sports career lasts less than half a decade. 4 years at $500,000 is the same amount of money as 40 years at $50K. If they live big as if the money would keep coming in, they're setting themselves up for failure. That is very true. It's different tiers there. There are some people that are destined to be athletes. I believe there are some people that would actually choose to be athletes even if they know the difference in price. There are a few that will take that money and invest it wisely, or at least make good decisions. Story 40. COVID and divorce. We were invested in a small brewery that did not make it through COVID. We had 2 rental properties generating income and vacation spots that were shut down due to COVID. Had to sell one off at a huge loss. Ex-wife then wanted a divorce and raked me over the coals. I won the other rental in the divorce, and that's about it. Story 41. 3 guys kidnapped me, put me under the influence, and coaxed me into telling my social security number. They drove past me in a limo throwing money all over the place. Later, the bank came and took everything I had, except for a can of anchovies. I ate those anchovies with my friends, and I learned a valuable lesson. Story 42. Not me, but my grandma. She started a shoe company. It became one of the biggest retails in the south part of the country. Then, as her retiring days got here, she passed it on to her kids, who ran it to the ground. She came out of retirement, and within a year she got out of debt and made it profitable again, then went back into retirement. They ran it back to the ground and even put a mortgage on her house. She let it fall and the company no longer exists. She saved her house with her savings, and she lived a comfortable retirement from money on properties she owned. Woo! That's an amazing second chance those kids had, and it's amazing that they blew it. The grandmother seems to know what's up. She seems to have complete control over the situation. I'm glad she survived.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 43. A family friend of mine had wealthy parents. Her dad had a terminal illness, and the family had to sell their mansions, vacation homes, etc. to pay medical costs. And her dad didn't live very long, despite putting every cent they owned into trying to help him. I think her mom is alive still, and taken care of by my family friend's sister. Story 44. I used to work at a wealth management firm when I was just out of college. We had a client that part of my daily set of tasks as low man on the totem pole was to send this guy a breakdown of his earnings first thing in the morning. When I started, he had about 10 million. And when I left less than 2 years later, he had under 100 grand. Also, by second week of work was when Lehman Brothers fell and the market crashed. Story 45. Not me or anyone I know personally, but there's a Korean living in our country that used to have his own company that managed a lot of real estate, like apartments, buildings, etc. He lost everything he had, around 6 million, when he gambled it away at casinos. Now he's a street vendor selling instant ramen and noodles. Story 46. My dad, not me. When he was young in the 70s, he wrangled other people into investing with him and bought a bunch of duplexes and fourplexes in San Francisco, renovated them, and mostly sold for a profit. However, he kept some. I think my mom estimated at one point, this was over a decade ago too, that if he had just sat on the properties he owned, he'd be taking in about $600K a month in rent. Instead, he invested with his brother in a home gym company and kept selling off property to fund it, and then got nailed by the IRS for failing to pay taxes. When I was a kid, he lived on a 30-foot sailboat because he'd lost it all. Story 47. Grandfather and great-uncle both went into the U.S. Air Corps as bomber pilots. After the war, they both were offered prestigious high-paying jobs flying for some airlines. Great-uncle took the job, made a fortune flying, and then got in the car business, became VP for a large American car company, perished rich in Jupiter, Florida. Grandpa found Jesus during the war, declined cushy jobs to go to the seminary, preached hell and mayhem as a Southern Baptist minister. As you can imagine, I'm dirt poor as my distant cousins grimace about 2-year-old Maseratis being out of style. Story 48. Guy I know made a fortune during the housing boom in the 2000s. Took all the money he made and put it all back into the real estate market. Then, housing crashed. He never recovered. Story 40. A cousin of mine. He's a dentist that owns 2 firms as well as several homes. Made a lot of money, but also had a lot of frivolous spending with a wife who also had a serious spending problem. Just an example, he had about 8 cars for a family of 4. His wife eventually divorced him and took a serious chunk of his income. He lost 1 home to her, and eventually his bad reputation caught up to him and had to sell his homes except for one to prop up his failing business, pay off all his debts. He sold nearly all his cars as well. It was definitely a shock to everyone but me. Because of child support, he's essentially living paycheck to paycheck now. Story 50. My ex was wealthy as a child. Her father owned a shipping company in South Korea, and they had a very nice life until her mother decided to gamble all their money on the stock market at the advice of some scummy experts. As much as that sucked, she often talked about how spoiled and ignorant they were being rich, and it taught her a lot of valuable lessons being normal people again. I miss her, but it's for the best we're not together. Story 51. Well, hell, I almost bought $1,000 in Bitcoin at $1 per coin on the assumption that it could go up in price one day. I was like 18 or 19 about 10 years ago. Probably would have cashed out sooner, but I really don't know. Hopefully I win the lottery one day. Story 49. Not me, but my grandfather. My family was very old money and made a lot of money through various businesses, specifically livestock. My grandfather was a spoiled kid who knew nothing about business and ran all of the businesses into the ground and left my dad when he was a kid. He grew up with a single mom, and I grew up very blue-collar. Hundreds of years of familial wealth gone in one generation. Story 53. My grandfather spent my trust fund. All the grandchildren, there's 6 of us, received $1 million in trust when we were born. Then my grandfather lost his medical license trading in spicy favors for prescriptions. To make payments on $22 million in properties, he turned to substance running, gambling, and stealing our money. He lost everything and was shot in his car by, we assume, the gang he was smuggling substances for. I didn't know about the trust fund until I was a teen, so not a big loss, but my grandmother, who lived a life of luxury, never got over the come down. Story 54. My dad flipped houses. Housing market crashed in 2008-ish. Little brother got born and needed 2 open-heart surgeries. Good old American healthcare. And then my mom and him split. Story 55. My dad. He was extremely successful early in his life. Skipped university and went straight to work. Had multiple businesses in his mid-20s. Became a millionaire before turning 30. My 3 siblings and I had a very comfortable life. We had a very large house, chauffeured cars, and several house help. How did we lose everything? Gambling. A friend of my dad introduced him to gambling, and he was instantly hooked. Within 5 years, we lost everything. We're lucky my mom had some savings and got a house of her own, so we didn't end up homeless. Our lives are much better now, thanks to my mom, and all of us avoid gambling of any sort. We'd refuse even for a $10 bet. Story 56. My parents are doctors. Back when we lived in Abu Dhabi, they were at a level that they used to treat Bollywood celebrities to. They became homesick and came back to India as we constructed a huge mansion in line with the money they were earning then. After coming to India, they were not able to get themselves to do wrongful practices as is required in India, and therefore had fights with top-level medical people in the state, and therefore have settled on a mediocre pay at an ethical small clinic. All the previous earned money was used up on building the house and maintaining it. Story 57. My brother made tens of millions over the years in property development, but it all went to hell last recession as finance companies started going bust and the receivers wanted to claw back the debts immediately, followed by his richer friends offering to bail him out with loans, but in reality they just wanted to scam him out of what he had left. Story 58. I'm asking a real question based on what you stated. The feeling of unease, often called imposter syndrome, I think it's real. But I want to know if in other people's experience, is it insecurity or is it in fact being in over your head? Whenever I see a question like this, the answer is always imposter syndrome, and I think that's mostly hype. But you, in absence of evidence otherwise, I'm wondering if I'm wrong. Story 59. My cousin, not me, he pretty much owned the biggest towing company of his city. But there was one problem. He loved his wife so much, he actually put the business in her name instead of his. He was the one that built everything from the ground up, not her. 1 year ago, they got a divorce, and well, she was actually a shrew about it and even decided to put a restraining order on him to be away from the business. He now lost his house, he also put that to her name, his pet, and all his businesses, and now the dude that once was giving me money to go on a shopping spree is now the dude that asked me for $5 the other day. Story 60. Not me, but my dad's boss. He was a corporate executive in the finance world, wealthy as hell, and very well liked, until they discovered he was embezzling from the company. Lost his job and went to prison for a long time. Shortly after the crime was discovered, my dad was offered his boss's job, which he took. He was over-the-top transparent about everything, and I grew up hearing the cautionary tale told over and over. My dad retired with a large company stock portfolio, worth nearly $2 million. Sadly, he never sold the stock, he had other retirement income, and today it's worth about $300,000. Story 61. I had a wallet with lots of bitcoins I mined before bitcoins were even worth a penny. Hard drive got formatted and installed in another customer's computer. It's gone forever. Every time I think about it, I get depressed. Story 62. My uncle was a commodities trader. He was good, had about $14 million in the bank. He also had some medical issues which caused him to need a hip replacement. He got a titanium hip from Johnson & Johnson, which was defective. It gave him toxic metal poisoning. Nickel and cadmium, I think. Anyway, it really changed his personality and his judgment in general. He ended up losing it all over the course of a few years, making really risky trades, which was essentially gambling. Story 63. My dad, actually. This story happened a while ago when he decided to invest in stocks. Beanie Babies were a giant thing back then, and he bought tins of limited edition rare ones. He wasted tons of money, and sooner or later they had lost all value. He tried to sell them for some money and later found a potential buyer. The buyer was willing to pay $70,000 for them, just some rich jerkwad with too much money on his hands. They set up a meeting, but before they could make the exchange, the collection burned down in a house fire. Moral of the story? Don't invest in anything. Story 64. Trying to do something good after years in the financial markets. I built a recycling company and lost a fortune. Doing better now, though. Different business. Story 65. Don't invest money in something you don't understand. My uncle lost money by investing in sand or something, hoping for big returns offered by a friend. He didn't even know how this thing works. Story 66. A family member of mine owned a scrap junkyard. A large tank full of chlorine gas was not checked first that it was empty, and the employees got chlorine gas poisoning, and he made them work until the ambulance came. He was sued and went bankrupt. Edit. I was told that their business was worth $1 million. Not sure what they individually were worth. They used to really do well for themselves, and after they lost it all, they became criminals, unfortunately. Story 67. My grandfather. He had a successful business and had stocks going crazy. It was a great success, but his success led him to having tons upon tons of side chicks. And when he passed, his side chicks claimed all his titles and money, leaving none to his true family. Story 68. My grandpa was the owner of one of the biggest clothing companies in Brazil, making millions worth in dollars. He then starts to mess with some dirty politicians, becomes a really bad guy, cheats on my grandma, leaves her for some young party girl, realizes she wants money and only that, signs his will to give everything to her, leaving my grandma and her 6 kids with almost nothing, and my grandma now lives with us as she has nothing. The mongrel then calls my dad, then shoots himself in the head in front of him on a bridge. Story 69. Good friend of mine worked in film distribution. Completely broke now. You're not rich if you spend everything you make. If you make $1 million a year and spend $1 million a year, you're broke. His career died, and he had no savings and a lot of commitments. Sad to see, but luckily he knows some wealthy people who help him out. Story 70. So we had a family friend who owned a pool business in Georgia. Very long story short, he turned it into a pretty big business worth millions, got into substances and gambling, and ended up stealing people's money by quoting them for projects, having them put down deposits, and then taking that deposit and spending it on paid spicy partners, blow, and gambling. Really not that interesting of a story. Story 71. My grandfather was a millionaire for a good 20 years. He lost it all in a bad land development deal that was stalled by the recession in Canada around 1990. He was also an awful dude who abandoned my grandmother and his 4 kids, started a new family, and never paid any kind of child support while being crazy rich. Had a great time at his funeral, though. Irish wake in a pub. Story 72. My father's family had a plumbing company in Dubai. My grandpa passed away, and my father inherited the company with his 2 little brothers. Later, he met my mother and moved to Finland with her. He gave up his third of the company. The other two are doing very well with the company now. My parents are living in poverty with little to no chance of paying the bills monthly. Story 73. In about 2000, I invested $10K into Google right before they blew up. I don't remember the exact number, but I know I was in at least 6 figures of profit. But I was only like 12 or 13 in a middle school economics class, so while I didn't actually profit, it got me an A on that assignment. Story 17. Know a lady at an AM/PM that sold a lotto ticket with one number off. The customer complained and refused to buy the ticket. So she did. Can't refund lotto. She won the jackpot, about $10 million take home. Bought a bunch of land and sand in Arizona you can't build on, started a company, burnt it down, but had no fire insurance. Someone got burned really bad. Bought a bunch of cars and mobile homes. Now works at Walmart. Story 75. My dad is an ex-millionaire. He was like a CEO of something or some tech thingy when I was a kid. I had all the coolest toys and the coolest everything back then, and was the envy of all the other kids. What made him lose everything? He had to leave his job because there was no one to take care of his parents, my grandparents. My grandma wasn't very considerate about it, and he was literally given no option but to quit. My dad's other siblings did great in life, but my dad had to give up a lucrative job due to the stubbornness of my grandma. He never had a big-time job after that, and had to settle for a low-paying job. But he never compromised on me and my sister's education, and ensured that we got the best of it. Story 76. A deceitful stockbroker who sold my stock without my permission. The stock he bought went belly up within a year. Was my first stock and didn't know that was illegal. A few short years later, the SEC shut down the company. Blinder Robinson. My $3,000 invested became $5,125,000 12 years later if I still had it. Or I would have, as I wanted it for my newborn son's college costs. 17 to 18 years after their birth. Still bothers me.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.